asked me to talk a little bit about philosophy, and I thought, well, hey, why not? Now, this isn't a worked-out coherent thought set. It's not a lecture on philosophy, so I'm going to jump around here and there, and I'm bound to say things that are contradictory. So what? I'm bound to lose my train of thought. I'm bound to scratch my head and try to have a think about where the hell it was I was going with something, and it's bound to make no real sense whatsoever. But hopefully there's something in it that you can pick out and think, oh yeah, that sounds interesting, or that's a load of bollocks and I completely disagree with it. It really depends. But I'm going to ramble on about philosophy for a little bit, and hopefully it'll be enjoyable, and you'll get something from it, and I will too. So here we go, preamble over. Now then, philosophy is a very curious thing in that sometimes when we think about it, we think it's important. Oh yeah, he has such and such a philosophy, how interesting. But then we think about it in academic terms, we think about philosophy as a subject, which is unbelievably dull, mostly because it's degraded itself and become really just an argument about symbols and signs. And that's pretty much a shame, to be honest, because it is an important issue. Now, it's an important issue, and certainly was important to the ancients, because it's all to do with control. Now, that might seem a wild statement to make, but have a think about it for a second. If there's a big group of people and you want to decide what to do, who do you listen to? You listen to the person who can claim to know. Claiming to know means that you have the truth. If you can claim the truth, you can control the group, and that's really important. Knowing the truth is what philosophy is all about, and you hear it. People tell you that philosophy is the search for truth, and to an extent, it is. But actually, it's kind of also justification that a particular truth is held, and that particular truth is true for all time. It's more to do with that, actually. But of course, stating it that boldly, saying it like that, really makes you think, hang on a second, screw you. So you have to be a bit more subtle about it. You have to say that this is the truth, not that this is a truth I'm making up so you'll follow me. And that's what philosophy does. Now, there are two streams to philosophy. It really just splits into two basics. One is the ideal view, or the idealist view, and the other is the materialist view. Now, I don't mean that in a vulgar sense, I mean that in a philosophical sense. The idealist view is where the mind exists, the soul exists, and it creates the world around you. And that's not a difficult concept to get hold of. If you think about God, God is one great big soul. Well, he created the world, and he created all those little souls, us, to inhabit that world. So religion is an idealistic view. It says that the soul came first and created the entire world around it. Now, materialism is the opposite. It says that the real world came first, and the interaction of all those things is what creates the soul, and that God is a construct of all those little souls to be one big soul, and that's a materialistic view. Now, there are two big problems with those views. The idealistic view is, if the mind is creating the world, the soul is creating the world, how do we know for sure that there isn't just one soul that's created that entire world to amuse itself, and all the other little souls just don't exist? And that's called solipsism. And in fact, there is no proof of that, because if I want to prove that solipsism isn't true, how do I do it? How do I go about that? You could well be that one great big soul inventing me and my proofs to disprove you, just as a means of amusing yourself through the eternity of the ages. And there is absolutely no way that I could possibly argue against that. Now, of course, we in ourselves know we exist. I feel like I exist. I don't feel like I'm a creation of you. I can't prove it, but I don't feel it. And equally, you're the same. You have a sneaking suspicion that other people exist. Of course, children don't think that. Children think that only they exist, and the rest of the world is to serve them. But you learn through harsh knocks, usually through life, that actually there's more people in the world than just you, and that you're not as important as you thought. I see that as the second big crisis. The first big crisis is being born. The second big crisis is realizing you're not the center of the world. It's harsh, but it's also what happens. So we quite quickly learn in a practical way that we're not the only soul that exists. But there's no actual proof that we're not the only soul that exists. So solipsism cannot be disproved. Equally, take the materialistic view. Materialistic view is we're basically all part of a great big clockwork. We're all fixed, we're all determined, we're all turning around, and those hands will move to a certain time, and there's nothing we can do about it. That kind of predestination equally has a huge problem, because if we're all that predetermined and it makes no difference what you do, why bother doing anything? And again, it's not something you can really argue against, and it's ultimate, it's not something you can disprove, because those two philosophies are completely contained within themselves, and the proof of their own existence exists only within the boundary of the philosophy. There's no way of getting out of that boundary to measure them in any other realistic sense to say they are or aren't true. They're just at the basics of it, and there's something that you have to accept. You just believe it. Now, practical experience obviously is a great big teacher, and if you believe that you're the only soul that exists and you take somebody else's chocolate and get a smack around the head, you soon learn that even though in theory you might be the only soul that exists, in practice the smack hurts just as hard. So in practice, other souls exist. And the same thing with the mechanistic view. If you believe in the mechanistic view and you behave like that it's all predetermined and predestined, and you do something like kill somebody, somebody's going to put you in prison, and that's very unsatisfactory even though you had no real choice about it. So the theory will tell you one thing, the practice will tell you another. I always turn to practice. I never really listen to what people tell me, because what people tell me is a construct of how they view the thing at any particular time. What they do in reality is the real guide to what they truly think. It's why I never listen to politicians. Politicians will tell you any old rubbish that they think will get them elected. You really have to look at what they do to have an understanding of what they truly think. Now it's no surprise that children are basically idealists. I mean idealist in a philosophical sense, obviously, but they're basically idealists because, of course, when you're born, only you do exist. Your mind is there perceiving the world, you have no experience of the world, so the mind comes first. And if you like, in the childhood of man, that's exactly what happened. Idealism was the philosophy that held sway, so we had a big growth in religion. Now, if idealism and religion is the route to truth, then it should be no surprise that the king claimed his lordship and his right to rule as directly given to him by God, and that the bishops claimed their right to rule from this exactly the same reason. Because they had the ear of God, they had the ear of truth. Because they had the ear of truth, they could hand it all down to the rest of us in mortality and tell us where to go. But as we grow up and as society grows up, as I say, in a practical sense, we quickly learn that the real world is bigger than we thought it was at first. And the same thing happened with philosophy. Philosophy soon learned that idealism as a route to truth was becoming less and less acceptable to the bulk of people around them as they investigated their world. So we got a growth towards a mechanistic view. Now, obviously, there is a problem with that. There's a problem when you create an idealistic world and then you want to move into a mechanistic world, is how do you do it? Now, this dualism is what Descartes was all about. And claiming the truth from a dualistic viewpoint is much, much harder than claiming the truth from a simple idealistic or materialistic viewpoint. So although the idealistic and materialistic viewpoint are not satisfactory in themselves anymore, their claims to the truth and their proof within themselves are undeniable. It's just that they don't actually match with our existence as we know it, so even though I can prove to you quite easily that only I exist, then it's going to be pretty unsatisfactory to you, not going to go very far, and you're probably going to turn off and stop listening because you're going to think I'm a bit of an arse. So if I were to propound that view, there's nothing wrong with it. I can prove it within itself, but it's not something you're going to listen to. So in order to control, in order to rule, if what you're saying is not what the group of other people believe, you're going to lose that control. So you have to modify what you think if you want to maintain it. And that is exactly what philosophy did. It modified itself to suit the situation in which it found itself, to suit the developing world as it developed around it. And we got this dualism concept coming up. Now, the problem with dualism is how the hell you prove one viewpoint from the basics of another viewpoint? Well, you can't actually. If you want to think of an elephant and then measure the distance between that thought of an elephant and a table, it's extremely difficult to do, because there is no yardstick that exists in both worlds at the same time with which you can do it. Now, to split things up that simply and to say, hey, that's the way it is, obviously it's not quite true, because things have developed and things always develop. Now, have a look at this cup. This cup's really interesting because there's two bits to it. It has a top bit and a bottom bit. So it contains an opposite. Now, if I want to remove all the top, in theory, all I have to do is slice it down the middle, take the top and throw it away. And what am I left with? I'm left with half a cup that has a new top and a new bottom. Well, the old bottom, but a new top. This idea of top and bottom Well, you get two opposites that are intimately mixed through a third thing are inseparable. Now, idealism and materialism are two opposites, and they're intimately linked within the third thing, us, and they're actually inseparable. Now, that's more where we're going. But again, you can choose to look at that from one side or another side, so you get a view from the ideal side and a view from the material side. Now that view is called dialectics, so you get dialectic idealism and dialectic materialism. But they're still based on this idea of the ideal being primary or the real being primary. Now, what do you do in order to reconcile these problems, in order to prove what you say is right? Well, to be honest, you've got really two choices. One is just to believe what you believe and tell everybody else that's a belief system, and the other is to enter into a 400-year-old argument that will never be resolved. And of course, what we've done is enter into a 400-year argument that is still unresolved. And that is a problem, because people don't accept themselves, and there's no real reason why not to. You believe something. It is just a belief. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, the search for the truth in philosophy and the use of philosophy to prove something is actually a matter of control, remember. It's not a matter of ethics. Now, I use philosophy as an ethical structure. That is, I have my own view of the truth, and I'm happy with that, and I'm not really interested in proving to anybody else that it's true. I believe it, and I'm happy with it. And I use that to govern my behaviour in relation to others. So one thing that I think is that other people exist. It's not just me. Other people exist too. I don't know why they exist. I don't know if there is a God. I don't know if the world is chucking them up to amuse me. I don't know why they exist, but I don't question the fact that they exist. Now, if they exist and they exist on a par with me, which is how I believe it to be, then how should I treat them? Well, I should treat them the same way that I treat myself. Fairly, evenly, with consideration and tolerance, most of the time. Obviously, I'm a person, so I get grumpy and pissed off, and I will treat people badly when I'm grumpy and pissed off. So when I reply to a comment and I'm snotty in my comment reply, that's only because I'm feeling grumpy or tired or pissed off, or I've been asked the same question at least 20 times and I think read the bloody comments. And I behave like that. And that behaviour is built on a philosophical belief that I have. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It only becomes a problem when you want to prove it. Now, if you want to prove something, then you're entering a whole different world of pain, because if you want to prove something, then you have to set up a whole set of axioms that are in themselves universally true. You have to apply consistency, you have to apply logic. The axioms themselves rely on definitions that we can all agree. So let's say, for instance, we take consciousness, we want to prove consciousness. We have to get a universally accepted definition of consciousness. And if you think that's going to happen anytime soon, forget it. It isn't. So the whole thing becomes a house built on sand. You get a definition that is essentially agreed by the bulk of people, but I can guarantee 100% somebody is going to disagree with your definition of consciousness. This is why philosophy academically has become an argument of symbols and signs, with the truth of symbols, because they're not universally agreed. There is no category, no way of universally defining something. Just take a simple example of a table or a chair. We all understand what a chair is, we all understand what a table is. But if you stretch that category definition to the very boundaries of its limits, it falls down. So let's take a chair and make it the same height as a table and call it a stool. Easy enough, I've got one here. Now let's take the back off that stool. It's still a stool, but if we then start putting pot plants on it, at what point does that stool become a table? There is a transition point, a grey area at the edge of any category where all categories fall down, irrespective of what you think that category is. So even in terms of table or chair, we can't get a universal definition. How the hell are we going to get a universal definition of consciousness? So there's a whole set of problems about proving something that you first have to do before you can go around your proof. This is exactly what science does. It attempts to define, categorise, set up a logical system in which proofs can be derived. And it was a huge disappointment to science when some people came along and said, hang on a sec, we've got uncertainty principles, we've got theorems that are unprovable. And this had really meant that science became a tautological system. It was only possible to prove something as long as it referred back into itself. And that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But then to extend that outward and say, just because this philosophy in itself proves itself, it's therefore true for everything else, that's what's wrong. Right? Science itself is a very useful medium when operating in the real world. True. But it doesn't have claim to ultimate truth, and that's a real disappointment. Science is only true as long as you accept the basic beliefs and tenements that science is built on. When you accept and believe those, they become axiomatic. Remember, any axiom is unprovable outside of itself. Any philosophical system measures only itself. When you believe those axioms, you can build the edifice of science, and you can claim to have knowledge. And that's okay, yes you can. But then to claim that that knowledge has universal applicability, and that everybody else should follow you because only you know the truth, that is what's wrong. If you want to prove something to somebody, you have to ask yourself the question of why is it that you want to prove it? What is it about what you believe that you are so unsure about that you feel the need to prove it? I don't feel the need to prove anything. I just believe what I believe. As I said before, it's full of contradictions, and I don't really think that matters. What I really think that matters is that you live with that belief and you use that belief to construct a moral guidance for how you behave in relationship to others. Now, philosophy also believes that. At least it did do, which is one of the reasons that philosophy and ethics are so closely tied to each other, because ethics is the moral guidance, philosophy is the search for truth, is fine, but that truth will only ever reveal to you your own truth. It won't reveal the truth for all time. If you want to reveal the truth for all time, the chances are that you want to do that for a number of reasons. Either you want to control other people, or you lack your own belief. Now, if you want to prove to other people that something is true, it's because you want to control them. If you want to prove to yourself that something is true, that's a different story altogether. If you want to prove to yourself that something is true, then the first stage of doing that is understanding what it is that you think, why it is that you're thinking it, and then just come to terms with that, live with it, and then use that as the basis for your own proof to yourself that something is true. And you're going to be quite happy doing that, and that's going to be quite an easy thing to do. An awful lot of Christians do exactly that. An awful lot of scientists do exactly that. There's a big problem with science, of course, because science is all about proving something to somebody else, because science is all about control. There's a problem with that, obviously. There's a problem with everything. But this one is that there is no actual structured guidance into what is moral. And that's because that's also part of my beliefs. I don't believe in giving moral guidance. I believe what I believe. I don't believe in trying to convince others of it. It's just what I believe. Now, I have a very Rousseau-esque notion of people. I believe that people are essentially good, including me. I think I'm essentially good. So all I have to do is refer to my good nature to behave in a good way. And it's very simple. It's a bit, but there for the grace of God go I, in that if I see my neighbours suffering, I ought to do something to help them because they'll do the same to me. But I actually believe that I help my neighbour because I have an essentially good character, which is what it's all about, really. But again, that is just a belief that I happen to have. I don't know where I've culled it from. I don't know how it's got there. It's just that that's what I believe and that's what I tend to apply. And that's what I think. I think that if you leave people alone and give up the boundary of control, people themselves will slip into essential goodness. And I know that a lot of people are going to disagree with that one, and that's up to you. If you don't believe people are essentially good, then by all means get out there and try to take advantage of them. But I don't think that's a good way to behave, and I certainly wouldn't entertain it with me. But it's up to you to make those decisions, really. Anyway, I know it's a huge ramble, but I hope there was things in it, and I hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you very much for listening.